what's up? Out to see everybody. Hope everyone's well. Let's go into some old degenerate acid stories, taking it back to mid to late 90s. And you know, these stories here are the antithesis to the modern therapeutic world of LSD. It's all love and light and healing, right, brother? You know, I used to cut myself in the closet while listening to Good Charlotte, and then I took LSD, and everything's better, bro. So, you know, this is the antithesis to all of that. You know, there may be some healing capacity to all of this, but the way we were getting down when we were kids, there was nothing healing about it. It was just wingnut shit, and we did substantial permanent damage. So I've got a handful of some little degenerate stories. Oh man, really taking it back, you know, a much simpler time. Talking mid-90s, you know, I'm like 16, 17, 18, 19 years old. Before we all had these fucking cell phones, before the internet had essentially destroyed humanity. You know, I used to have friends. You know, we were tight. We'd stay at each other's houses. Now I'm talking to this fucking camera, right? But the future is now, bro. Here we are. So I had one of the past L videos I made, I tell a story about splitting a quarter sheet with my good buddy, the LSD and telepathy video, where when we left my parents' house in the morning, we were seeing this like Arabic style language bubbling out of the street. We were super tight and we'd have the same hallucinations, right? So we split a quarter sheet of blotter, you know, and we were eating transine, you know, a really rare benzodiazepine. They were 15 milligram pink three-dimensional T pills, T for transine, and it was like a 10 milligram Valium, right? We had the disabled longshoreman that was giving us bottles of transine, 30 milligram morphines. You know, that set us up for a life of chemical dependency. That was a good guy there. But anyways, so we split that quarter sheet. You know, we took the 12 and a half hits each, and my God, man, I somehow ended up at the Red Robin off of East Lake on the south side of the U Bridge with my old buddy Eric later on in the day, following taking all that. And I remember sitting there like trying to eat a burger. I'm at Red Robin. It was just horrific, right? So we didn't just eat all that acid, you know. Every time we sucked the L out of the blotter, we're talking just old school, unperforated white blotter. And this was a particularly good batch. You know, this must have been like 99 or something, because it was after I'd been busted by the feds in 98. This was like a year later. This must have been like 99. So I had, I've always loved the art of MC Escher. And since I was pretty young, I've always had a print of day and night. You know, the image of, it's like a yin-yang with birds going different directions. I've always loved that. So I had that on my wall in my room at my parents' house, where me and my buddy split this quarter sheet. Now, we just kept eating this stuff until it was gone. We're toast on the benzos, and we were grilling our faces off, right? So after we'd suck the L out of this blotter, we'd take the remaining wet piece of blotter and we stuck it up on this poster on my wall. You know, about halfway through all that, we were too gone and probably started swallowing it or whatever. But there was like 15 sucked out hits of blotter that were up on this day and night poster, right? They were stuck there. And I remember I ended up putting the black light up to it to see, like, wonder if there's any L left in there. And sure enough, there was. You know, some of these hits still were glowing pretty bright, some brighter than others. Because the LSD glows under the black light, right? So living in Sandpoint. This was off of Sandpoint and Ivanhoe Way. Really nice neighborhood in Seattle. This was before, you know, things were still okay. You know, my mom had remarried. She met my stepdad at the pagan cult she joined when we moved to Seattle. That'll have to be a whole other video. You know, my mom essentially joined this pagan cult. It's where she met my stepdad, had a couple kids with him. You know, he was straight out of the psych ward. Things were good for a while. Unfortunately, it all dissolved badly and ended up really tragic and sad. But yeah, when we moved to Seattle, me and my mom, when I was 13, within a year, she was in this pagan cult. And there was a high priest and a high priestess. The high priestess was this super obese blonde woman named Amanda. She was a pimp. She was running a call girl service out of her little pagan mansion house up in Lake City. And then the high priest was this old heroin addict named Carl. So, you know, psychedelics and weed were not frowned upon in this weird earth-worshipping pagan cult that my mom joined. You know, she was about it, right? Like, she got the pentagram tattooed on her breast. She like married my stepdad in white linen gowns in Seward Park in South Seattle. But I digress, you know. So we were all kind of fucking wackos, right? I remember after my good buddy's dad met my stepdad, he said, "I don't know how Ian came out so normal." So anyways, we got, you know, a good 15 hits of blotter up on this Escher poster in my room. And we're living in Sandpoint. We meet this other family up the way. You know, they're also kind of hippie weirdos. A lot of this in Seattle, right? A lot of weirdos. And this woman had a daughter around my age. You know, she was also a juvenile delinquent and getting into trouble and whatnot. So, of course, we hired her on as a babysitter. You know, at the time, my little sisters are probably 4 and 3, something like that. They're young, right? And things were still fairly stable and pure. You know, my stepdad hadn't totally lost his mind yet. He was still employable. You know, life was okay. But, you know, we were all latchkey kids. This was late 90s. Our parents were just letting us run amok. You know, they cared, but I think they were just kind of willfully ignorant regarding what was really going on. You know, we were getting into a lot of shit under their roofs and, you know, what should have been their watch. But, you know, can only blame the parents so much, right? So, this babysitter, you know, this young woman, she's probably like 17, 18. She's around our age, you know. She comes over to the house to babysit my little sisters. Me and my homie are hanging out, and this was, she got over a little bit early, and she ended up coming in my room. We're hanging out, chatting. You know, it turns out she was totally into drugs and whatnot. And we asked her if she'd taken acid before, and she was all about it. Oh yeah, you know, I've done hella acid, da-da-da-da. And so I point up to the poster, the day and night. I was like, you see that poster? I was like, you notice anything funny about it? To her credit, she called it. She got it. Even though it was unperforated white blotter paper, wet with our saliva that we pasted up on there, and it stuck pretty well. She called it. She's like, "Are those hits of acid up there?" I was like, "Damn, you called it. All right." I was like, we're like, "Yeah, you know, we split this quarter sheet and lost our minds a little while back, and when we'd suck out the blotter, we put it up on the poster." And she was like, "Huh." And we're like, "Yeah, we put the black light up there, and I think there's still acid in some of them." So we left. We went to the U District or something. She stayed at the house watching my little sisters. And this was just for like a couple, you know, 2-3 hours. It wasn't all that long, right? So we're gone for, you know, a little while for the afternoon. And we get back to the house and ask my mom. We're like, "Yeah, what's up with homegirl, you know?" My mom was like, "Yeah, she watched the girls, and then as soon as we got home, she pretty much bailed immediately. Didn't really say much. It was kind of strange. Like, she got out of here real quick." I was like, "Huh, okay." We go to my room, and my buddy, he's like, Ian, dog, check this out. He's like, look, the blotter's gone off the poster. This girl ate all of that acid, all the blotter acid that had been in our mouths, that we sucked out most of it, but there was still enough L in some of these pieces of paper. It was glowing under a black light. She ate it. She ate it. She ate all of that L that was stuck to the Escher poster on the wall in my room. Who knows how much was in there, but we're talking like it was a good 15 hits up there. Who knows if she took it all or not. Never saw her again. Never saw her again. You know, and she was living a few blocks away. She never babysat for us again either. So, you know, that's very reckless and irresponsible. But that happened, man. That happened. You know, hope the poor kid was okay. But, you know, this was after I'd been puddled to hell, and you know, I took a lot of abuse in junior high and high school. I was small, I was weird, I was an easy target for bullying, right? So I took a lot of shit. I was getting beat up, I was getting fucked with, but as soon as I started dealing with a lot of L, and as soon as I realized the power it had, the strength of this stuff to alter the mind, you know, it's powerful stuff. And I was maybe a little bit bitter about my junior high and high school experiences. And, you know, when opportunities presented themselves, I was down for some revenge, you know. So there was, gosh, you know, it's hard to say. Probably around 18 at the time. You know, I think this happened before this event. We're talking late 80s. Me and my little posse of wingnuts were in the U District, you know, running around just aimlessly. And we end up on Frat Row. You know, in the University District, you got University Way, the Ave. At the time, it was kind of like a Haight-Ashbury situation. You got the University of Washington, thus University Way. And there was what was known as Frat Row. You know, all the big frat mansions were like on a couple blocks near University Way. And sometimes we'd go wander around and find parties to crash. Now, you know, these are like cracking college keg parties, full-blown frat parties, frat boys, frat girls, you know, talking white polo hats, you know, popped collar polo shirts, a bunch of frat douches, right, with red Solo cups, kegs of beer, that whole nine, right? And we were not fitting in, right? Like, we were the U District baller L weirdos, right? Like, we stuck out like a sore thumb. Our whole style, our whole swagger. We clearly were not your run-of-the-mill frat kids and college kids. It's like, we weren't going to the fucking college. We were in the U District, like, on the outskirts of the college, selling acid and shit to the college kids, you know. We were around the campus. We end up at this big frat party, you know, big frat house. And a lot of times there'd be someone at the door trying to kind of gauge who's coming and going. And a lot of times, you know, it was obvious that we weren't part of the frat or whatever. Nobody knew us. They didn't recognize us. But a lot of times we'd manage to get ourselves in by just laying down like a 10 strip of acid or whatever. You know, like, where are you from? It's like, yo, here's some acid, you know, let us party. It's like, okay, bro, yeah, come on in. So we're at this big frat party. And this crew of girls starts talking to me and my buddies. You know, it's me and like a few other buddies. And we're clearly not frat kids. And I think that's why these girls liked us. Right? Like, we were a little bit different, had a little bit different of a swagger. We weren't your run-of-the-mill boner frat boy. So these girls are talking to us. You know, we're just chopping it up, hanging out. You know, we're drinking some of their beer. And, of course, some of these jockey frat kids, I think are probably jealous and come up to us. They see like, oh, man, these fucking weirdos are taking our girls, right? So these douchebags come up on us like, you guys go to the school, where are you from, what frat you with? And it's like, yeah, dog, we're not with the frat, like, but we're up in the U District, man. Like, what do you want, you know? Like, well, you know, this is a frat party. You're not supposed to be here if you're not part of the frat. So, you know, and these kids are getting like kind of threatening. You know, they're already on the verge of being aggressive, and I can tell they're the kind of kids that are like down to fight, want to cause problems. And so I bust out the acid. I'm like, yo, you want to take some acid, bro? It's like, what, you got acid? It's like, yeah, man, you want to take some? Pull out, you know, like a sheet of blotter, right? At this point in time, a sheet of blotter is nothing. It's like 80 bucks, you know, whatever, right? But these kids never see nothing like that. It normalized for us, not normal to them. So this little frat bitch starts telling me, that's not real, bro. That's fake acid. You're just flexing. It's like, ah, you think so? Well, here, eat this, bro. I bust off like a solid 10 strip. A good chunk of white unperforated blotter. And I can't remember if this was like cleaner white fluff or if it was the kind of rough Schwamber. I can't quite remember. Either way, you're gonna be grilled. So this kid is trying to tell me that my acid's fake and I'm flexing. And I'm like, you think it's fake, man? Here, take a chunk. So I convinced this kid to eat the 10 strip. He takes the whole 10 strip down. I kind of, you know, make eye contact with a couple of my friends. We got a little grin like, this kid wants to act like a tough guy. Be a tough guy now, bro. And so it kind of cooled him out. You know, he kept trying to say the acid's fake. It's like, you just ate 1,000 mics, dog. And, you know, yes, that was reckless. And yes, it was a little bit cruel. But I was kind of getting revenge, man. Yeah, I weaponized it. I learned from the best. You know, this stuff is power. You want to fuck with me? You want to threaten me? I was done. I had it. You know, I wasn't taking any more shit. And I'm going to ruin you, bro. So he kind of, you know, they chilled out a little bit. We kept kicking it, and we're kind of just waiting for shit to hit the fan, right? We did this a few times, crashing frat parties like this, like dosing the fuck out of the people at the party, and ruined frat parties, ruined the parties. So about an hour and a half, 2 hours go by, you know, and since I gave him such a huge dose, it didn't take all that long for it to start hitting the kid. By the time we left this frat house, the music was off, and Mr. Tough Guy had himself locked in a room upstairs, periodically letting out screams. You know, he had a couple friends trying to get in there. The door was locked. In retrospect, yeah, that was not cool, but this is just what was happening at this point in time back in the day. You know, this is the antithesis to Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind, you know, therapy on LSD BS. You know, this is what was going on back in the day when there was Dead Tour L flowing around for dirt cheap. It was not healing. It was losing your mind, and it was weaponized. It happened to me, and I learned from the best, and I did it to others. But I was done taking shit from people. And hopefully the kid was all right, you know. So another event. This was maybe early 2000s, you know, 2001, something like that. There was this club in Pioneer Square, you know, this kind of dark rave spot. This is where I was going to go with Froje the time I got puddled out by Lee in the U District with, you know, the crazy fam wash that was like 20 hits a drop, squirted a stream of it down my throat. You know, I straight fished out in the bushes in someone's front yard by the U Bridge, pissed my pants, had a seizure, died, reborn, you know. Therapy, right? Therapy out here. So me and my buddy were at this same club in Pioneer Square, and it was kind of a grimier, darker spot. I can't remember the name of it. You know, in the late 90s, you had Vinylized, Power Plant, you know, West Seattle, you had NAF, but this was a spot like right down in Pioneer Square. In Pioneer Square, in the middle of the night, is shady as fuck. You know, it's not safe down there at all. So, I'm with my good old buddy Fraggle Rock. We'll call him Fraggle Rock. You know, I think maybe he watches some of these sometimes, and he's a paranoid guy. He wouldn't want me to use his name, even though it's just a first name. But we had this girl that nicknamed him Fraggle. You know, he had very Fraggle Rock style hair. He was a good buddy, but he got completely spun out with us. You know, I was initially selling him vials of L when I was raging L, and we just stayed buddies. You know, we related to one another, and we were both, you know, blooming drug addicts that initially were en natural, eating too much acid, mushrooms, and old school Seattle chronic. So we start hitting the rave scene pretty hard, you know, and this was like, you know, by around the year 2000 is when I started getting into the ecstasy. You know, we were getting MDA powder, MDMA powder, all types of press tabs, and really just letting loose on the rave scene. You know, there had been so much tragedy and horror that by the time the Molly came around, it was like, yes, please. I just want to have fun and not give a fuck, right? Definitely did some substantial brain damage with all that Pipernol, MDA, SAS, all of that. You know, I remember when it stopped working. It was no longer ecstasy. And I remember when it's like, wow, my serotonin is depleted. You know, breaking down into tears because I'm out of strawberry jam to make an almond butter and jam sandwich. You know, we fried ourselves with this stuff, right? I digress. So, this was the night before Thanksgiving. I remember that. It was the night before Thanksgiving, and we're at this shady rave down in Pioneer Square. And, you know, of course, we have some acid. You know, me and my buddy Fraggle, we each got a vial on us. You know, a good old classic little plastic sweet breath dropper. And his vial, it was half a vial. It was half a sheet. He had about 50 hits in there. And we also had some press tabs. We bought some press tabs at the club, so we're rolling. And, you know, took a couple drops of L, having a good time. You know, it was under control until I remember it's getting pretty late. You know, it's like 2, 3 in the morning. This place is popping off. This is back in the day when things were just live, right? And I remember this DJ, he was playing a pretty sick house mix, and he dropped Stevie Wonder's Sir Duke in there. And he did the sickest mix with this Stevie Wonder track. We're just getting down, dancing, you know, it's a dope party. And I notice that my buddy Fraggle, like, he doesn't look like he's having a good time. I'm having fun. Everyone's having fun. He looks bugged out. He's like, he looks scared. He looks concerned. And I know that look. It's like, damn, it looks like he has the fear. You know, it looks like he's not doing well. So I kind of get near him. You know, it's loud as hell. Like, you all right? You all right? And he's like, not really able to answer. And I kind of take him, get him away from the speakers to where we can hear one another a little bit. I was like, dude, what's going on, man? You look bugged out. And he's like, I don't know, man. I do feel really bugged out. I feel really, really high. I was like, well, what did you take? You know what I mean? He's like, we just, same as you. You know, we took the press tab and a couple drops. And I see his mouth kind of drops. Like, he's like, a couple drops. And he goes into his pocket, his jeans pocket. He pulls out the sweet breath vial. The cap is off. And it's empty. It's empty. He had like 50 drops of some good, proper L spill in his pants, soaked through his jeans, into his leg. 50 drops. You know, who knows how much of that he actually absorbed, but it was enough. It was enough that he had the fear and was not functioning properly. Poor Fraggle man, he was never quite the same after this event. So we leave the club. You know, he remembers, it's like, it's Thanksgiving. You know, it's 2 in the morning, it's Thanksgiving. He's scheduled to be at his mom's Thanksgiving dinner the next day, right? And he's kind of manic and panicking and, you know, not sane, right? And so we get outside of the club, and he immediately, like, so it's like right down in Pioneer Square, and there's all these shady homeless dudes and crackheads, and like, it's dangerous down there at night, right? Like, when we go down there, you gotta watch each other's backs, you gotta move in crews, you gotta move in groups. There's shady motherfuckers down there. And so I watch him, we leave the club, and he goes straight over to this alley, and there's these like shady black dudes like in the alley, and he's asking them how to get to a particular bus stop. In his mind, he's just trying to get on the bus to get back to his mom's. And I totally related. Like, when I got puddled super hard, I was just trying to get back to my mom's. And he was clearly out of it enough. He didn't realize that, like, it's 3 a.m. These buses aren't running, bro. And so he's out of his mind, goes up to these shady black dudes in the alley, like, I'm looking for this bus stop. And dude's like, yeah, it's back here, dog. Like, trying to get him back in the alley. And I was like, God damn it. I run up and grab him like, Morgan, come with me. Come with me. Fraggle, whatever. Oh man, the poor kid. We managed to get a ride out of there. And get him to his buddy's house in Ravenna, like outside of the U District. And he's just out of it. That definitely, like Alexander Shulgin says, sometimes you bend things that don't want to unbend. Just like when I got puddled, when he spilled that L in his pocket, it left a mark, man. It did some damage. This is just what was going on back in the day, right? Like, there was nothing therapeutic or responsible happening. We were whiling out super cheap L. We were just wingnuts, right? It's like, sure, we had enough experience with it that we knew there was some type of spiritual side to it, but we might have just been fucking insane. Who knows? What is spiritual, right? Like, we're alive, we're here, like, everything's spirit, right? It's all flowing with spirit. So I think it gets, a little complex when you start talking about, like, what is spiritual, and is tripping on psychedelics really spiritual? Who knows what's really happening there? We did a lot of damage to ourselves, right? And, talking about dosing people, I had it happen to me a bunch of times, right? I got expelled from Nathan Hale High School during my sophomore year. I was picking the psilocybin cyanescens out of the alder chips behind the school. The psilocybin cyanescens were growing on the school grounds, and these things were power. I got popped, the school security got me with a paper sack full of these, and they're like, this kid's a drug dealer, and da-da-da. I was like, I picked these on the school grounds. It's like, yeah, sure, I'm probably selling some drugs. But, I got these, I picked them from the ground and the school. They call the police, he shows up, and I tell the cops, I'm like, from what I understand, these are legal until they're bagged and dried. These are psilocybin cyanescens, and I picked them on the school property. And as far as I know, they're legal until they're bagged and dried. The cop looks at the principal and he's like, kid knows his law. He's not wrong. So they couldn't arrest me. Well, the cop took me away, but I got expelled from the school. And I ended up going to the alternative school across the way, Summit K through 12. And all the older druggies there kind of hazed me. And so this one kid, older kid, he sold me a joint. And I went and smoked that joint during lunch break with another friend from the school across the way. Schools were literally across the street from one another. There was Nathan Hale and Summit. This is up in Lake City. Sold me a fucking Sherm stick, bro. This was like some crappy shake dipped in Sherm. I remember me and my buddy both thought like it tasted a little weird. All I know is that we smoked this thing and I just started walking. I was totally disassociated. I walked like 40 blocks before I came to and was like, what am I doing? Like, what just happened? what just happened, you know? And when I go to school the next day, they were calling me Sherman. They nicknamed me Sherman. Yo, what up, Sherm? What up, Sherman? You know, how cruel is that shit? You know, I'm just trying to smoke a joint. These kids are selling me Sherm sticks against my will. So, you know, I saw a lot of shady stuff going on with drugs back in the day, and, you know, I'm not proud of the fact that I had my revenge here and there. I was a little pissed off. I was a little bit bitter. And when people wanted to fuck with me, it's like, you want some L, dog? See how tough you are after this. You know, my old school Dead Tour hook that was getting me all the L before I got popped, he was going down to the bay, getting the grams of raw crystal. And at the time, since he was a junkie, you know, he'd been in prison, he got addicted to shooting speedballs. It sounds like back in the day when he was on tour, he was getting proper white fluff by the half ounce. But now he was a full-blown junkie, and he was getting the Schwammer. You know, it was like they reserved the dirty acid for, you know, the deadheads who got strung out. It's kind of what seemed to be the case. I'm downtown with this cat. You know, he was clean when I met him, but he starts making money, and the speedballs seeped back into things. So we spent a lot of time around the Blade, 3rd and Pike, right? I meet him downtown, and I'm getting a book. You know, he just laid a gram. The books were still wet. So I get a book from him. We're walking down the street. There's a bum begging for money. He's straight up about it. He's like, spare change for alcohol. Rob looks at this dude. He's like, you want a shot? And he's like, yeah, sure, bro. Motherfucker pulls out this jar. You know, we were keeping substantial amounts of L in glass jars. You know, the thick amber-colored glass jars. I'm surprised we never broke them. But, you know, we were keeping them in like old CD Discman pouches and whatnot. But he had a big jar of liquid that had been diluted. You know, it wasn't crazy strong. It was like 100 mic drops. I watched him pour like nearly a shot's worth. It was, the L was broken down in Bacardi 151 rum. And he gave this bum like nearly a shot's worth of 151 rum saturated in LSD just in his bare hands. He's like, cup your hands. He poured like half of this jar into this bum's hands. This poor man sucked it up out of his hands. We start walking away. Dude looks at me with crazy eyes and says, he's gonna be scared pretty soon here. I was just like, what the fuck was that? Like, why did you do that? This was the type of prankster shit that was happening with these cats off Dead Tour, right? Like, it was wild times, man. And, you know, I'm fortunate that I'm not completely insane and I'm still here to tell a few stories. And, you know, all considering I'm generally healthy. Yeah, I got severe HPPD, and yeah, I've dealt with severe drug addiction over the years. But hey, I'm here, I'm alive, you know, I'm still wearing my nice Jonathan Richard wool Irish cap. So things can be a lot worse. But, you know, hope these stories weren't too shady. But I just gotta own it, right? Like, the way things were going back in the day, it was not love and light and healing and how to change your mind with Michael Pollan and, you know, therapy on L. A lot of damage was done, man. And so be safe out there. Don't be puddling people out. Don't be eating 10 strips of blotter. You know, take it easy on yourself. Much love, everybody. Peace.